and welcome to the Rural Well. I'm Bridgette here with Loren, and we are so thrilled to have you with us. Today, we want to talk about a book, a friend, and where's that resource going to lead you? What impact will that have on your life? Are you intrigued? Well, good news. You're going to want to stay tuned. So you might be unloading your feed truck, fueling up your tractor, or just waiting on hold for a parts service call. Well, we're glad you're here and listening because we had the well-being of rural areas like yours in mind when we were building this episode. We know how challenging ag can be, but we are right alongside you, and we cannot wait to connect and inspire one generation and legacy to the next. Loren, we have a friend of yours who's going to join us today, and I think he's about to be a friend of mine. Would you care to introduce?
Absolutely. Bridgette, so good to be with you again today. I'm excited to have this conversation because we're talking about the hard stuff that lots of times we shy away from talking about. And it's unfortunate. In rural communities, we are more likely to engage in substance use, and we're more likely to not always reach out for other forms of support and rely on, alcohol or other means to kind of help us cope. And Gerry is this authentic farmer and person who is just so genuine. He's not only has he lived an experience, but he has spearheaded for other people. So he is one of the board chairs and creators of the Farmer Wellness Program in Manitoba. And it's an absolute pleasure to have you here, Gerry. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I've looked forward to this conversation for some time now.
Good.
Gerry, I saw the cover of your book just a little bit ago. And the first thing I want to do is ask you, introduce us to that. Tell us a little bit about your book, because I think that will help us shape our direction of our day.
Oh, you asked the toughest question first, because I never know how to quite answer that. You know what? The long and short of it is Lauren and I have talked numerous times over the last few years, and the long and short of it is I used to farm. I don't farm anymore. But in the course of that, I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression. And so began what I call a journey. And really, at first, it was more of a recovery. Then it became more of discovery because I started learning more and more about mental health. I became passionate about the subject, particularly as it concerns our agricultural community. And at some point in time, through challenges from various people, I sat down and I wrote about my journey. And so I put it out there. Why did I do it? I have no idea, but I did. And I enjoyed doing it. And as it turns out, it was rather therapeutic doing it. So that was a good thing.
I'm going to show everybody the cover. You might not be able to see it too well, but it's titled The Recovering Farmer. And Gerry, in it, you talk about your life's journey. One of the things that is very poignant in your book is you talk about the issues and the stresses that you endured and experienced as a farmer. Tell me about what your experience is now as you work with farmers, because you've now kind of turned the tide and you now work with farmers in Manitoba regarding their wellness. Help put that link together. What are some of the issues you faced, and do you still see those issues, or have they changed?
You know what? It's ironic, Lauren, that you asked that. I was just sitting here getting ready to do another presentation, and I always look at the stressors in agriculture going back to, it was 2007, so that's a number of years ago that I started doing some volunteer work with the Manitoba Farm and Rural Stress Line. And at the time, we would always take not copious, but we would keep data on what calls were about and what farmers were saying their biggest stressors were. And I had those stressors. And in my case, the big one was financial, of course. I had a hog operation, so weather didn't impact me as much, but certainly the financial issues did. And from that arose other issues. And yet, when I compare today to what the farming community is telling me about their stressors are, it seems the stressors never change. Perhaps one is more important now, when we talk about some of the stuff going on. But really, in essence, the stressors kind of remain the same, although they seem to be increasing.
Mm-hmm. Magnified, right? We have the
exactly.
same stressors, but they if we were to put them in a lineup of 5 different things, 1 and 3 stand out. Next year it might be 4 and 5. They keep moving around, but they're still there.
That's a really good way of putting it. Exactly.
I have to ask, with a title like, I believe it's The Recovering Farmer, why did you choose that?
You know what? Shortly after I quit farming and started doing that volunteer work, I started referring to myself as that. Never entirely sure again why. I suspect it had something to do with, we often talk about recovering from addictions and, recovering alcoholics. I suspect it was kind of based in that. In fact, it was interesting that one day I did an interview on the radio and the host referred to me as that. And my sister actually called me and said, "What does that mean?" And I couldn't really give her an answer. So I went home and I looked into it. And at the time, the Encarta Dictionary defined recovering as returning to a previous level of health, prosperity, and equanimity. And of course, that kind of encapsulated exactly where I was at and continue to be at. And yes, I could talk at length about, some of these things. Of course, prosperity, when you basically go broke on the farm, it takes some time rebuilding that. And I'd sometimes facetiously say, my wife tells me I have to work till noon the day of my funeral because of my farming experiences. And that's fine, and the health piece, of course, my journey isn't a straight line, but particularly my mental health isn't a straight line. Mm-hmm. It has its curves and bumps and potholes, and sometimes there's good days and other times there isn't. But it's kind of the equanimity piece that I keep getting into. And equanimity, of course, means to have an evenness of temper even when under stress. And that's where I still have a lot of work to do in my recovery is to get a better handle on that. So I just, way back when I did look at it, Bridgette, it was just like, that defines me to a T.
Mm-hmm. It really would. As you spoke, there was something I want to ask that really stuck out to me based on your discussion about farming. And I heard you say addictions in some ways. Do you think farming is an addiction?
Oh, that's an interesting question. And you know what? I suspect it could be. And you know what? That takes me back to something. I'm an avid golfer, right? And some time ago, I saw a little meme that said, maybe I'm not addicted to golf. Maybe golf is addicted to me. So I'm just out there. I can't help this. And perhaps it's the same way with farming. Maybe the farmer isn't addicted to farming, but the farmer is addicted to the farmer. That's not a clear answer to your question. But what I do talk about in my book, Bridgette, is the identity we build, and it's not just farming. It's other folks, and I know after some folks have read my book, they've come back to me. I know a retired teacher came back to me and talked about the identity teachers have, but particularly in farm debt mediation, I've met with so many farmers that have tied their whole identity to the farm. And when challenges arise, they have a difficult time dealing with those challenges because of that identity. And very often those conversations would be, you know what, let's change that. Because as long as your identity is tied to the farm, the way you're explaining it, it's going to be difficult to make any changes, whether that includes not farming anymore, or whether that just simply means that we have to change the way we're farming because again, that identity gets in the way.
Mm. Identity is such an important piece. And I think sometimes for farmers, it's one of the reasons it actually restricts us because we see ourselves as a farmer and nothing else. And part of our work is actually to grow that. Like, yes, you're a farmer. You're also a dad, or you're a husband, or you're a coach, or you're, community member, and you're all of these different pieces. And what happens though on the farm when our identity is so tied to being a farmer, I often find that when that piece gets disrupted, so does our identity and our sense of self-worth and self-confidence. And it brings me back. There was one of your quotes in your book. You talked about liquid courage, right? And I think, is that liquid courage? Was that was that tied to fulfilling that identity? Is that one of the reasons why we're no more prone to use substances, is to fulfill something even when we feel like we're not able to?
Without question, Lauren. And I often say in my presentations, when I talk about my own story, I say alcohol does an amazing job of easing anxiety. And usually people that are listening, their eyes kind of open and go like, what? Well, just hang on. I'm not done yet. Yes, it does for a fleeting moment. But then as alcohol leaves the body, it exponentially increases anxiety. So the only way to combat that is to drink more. So yes, but the other piece with alcohol, for sure, Lauren, I've always been somewhat of a introvert. I deal a lot with, now the word escapes me, imposter syndrome.
Yes.
I deal a lot with imposter syndrome. And so drinking would actually give me courage. It would, if I kept it within certain lines, right? Which again is difficult to do at the best of times. But during those fleeting moments when I was within the lines, I felt more confident. I felt more creative. I felt more like, yes, I can do these things. But again, like I say, that's for 20 minutes, half an hour, and then it all becomes even more muddled than it was.
Yeah. Wow.
We are seeing a lot of substance use in self-medication, whether it's through liquor. There is a rampant amount of prescription drugs or non-prescription that are used by those who, whether it is you farm, you're part of an operation, you're part of an agribusiness, whatever the stress might be. Do you think that there's more of an uptick, Gerry, in people self-medicating with one or the other and hiding it, or trying to do a very bad job of hiding it from others?
Without question, Bridgette, because you start on this journey with having a drink or two to take the edge off. And when the challenges keep being there or even increasing, then you need a drink or two more to take that edge off. And suddenly in your own mind, most people will recognize that, I'm doing something I probably shouldn't be. And so the more they do that, the more they withdraw and hide the fact that they're drinking. And in fact, I read something just recently that talks about society in general. More and more people are going in a closet. I like talking about closets and coming out of closets. They go into a closet because they're alone and it feels safer to them to do these things inside a closet. And like you say, Bridgette, people that drink have this really twisted way of thinking, gosh, I'm hiding it from everybody.
Yeah, it's like that coming home with that drunk whisper that you're pretty sure nobody can hear, but everybody can hear you.
Yes. And guess what? Drink vodka because nobody will smell that.
But we know.
It's one of the, when I think about substance use and in the farmers that I work with, it's actually one of my first questions. Like we talk about, okay, what are some of your strengths? What are some of the things you're good at? Like we go from a strength space, but then pretty sure we're like, okay, tell me about your usage of alcohol, because so many farmers are using it to cope. And like you said, there's a number of them that do hide it out in the shed behind the bins. We find it afterward, or wherever. And I guess I struggle with, how do we change that trajectory so that we give farmers permission to tackle the hard stuff like you did, Gerry, and not have to feel ashamed? Because we see a lot of unhelpful guilt in agriculture, right? With this feeling like I have to do something to meet somebody else's expectations. We don't even know who those person's expectations are. It's just, they're out there. We have these high expectations. When we can't meet them, we feel a sense of failure. In order to give ourselves liquid courage, in order to give ourselves courage and confidence, we use, substances. So how do we change that messaging, or what are your thoughts on that, Gerry?
we have to get the message out there that folks are not alone. And I run into this so often. And in fact, my farm debt work, mediation work has really increased lately. And even now when I meet with farmers who feel that shame about being in the situation they're in, who still have this sense of, nobody knows what I'm going through. I'm alone at it. Nobody else is dealing with this. And of course, we have all these social media, for example. Mm-hmm. And a prime example is where some time ago, a farmer told me that, you know what, I went to social media and someone posted that, woohoo, I paid my tractor off a year earlier than I had to. And the farmer just sank into this despair and shame because he said, guess what? I just had to make arrangements with my banker to extend my loan another year. And so that makes them feel that, guess what? I'm alone. Nobody else knows what I'm going through. And I think we have to make sure that we keep on, not we start, we keep on. Lauren, I know you do it, I do it, many others across the country are doing this, is to normalize that conversation, to make sure that folks are aware of the fact that farming is difficult. Bridgette, you talked about those perhaps 5 pillars of stressors. There may be more, there may be less, whatever the case is, but absolutely everybody's dealing with them. And I talked years ago when the hog industry was going through a really difficult time. I talked to a room full of hog industry people, and at the outset, I said, I want every hog producer in this room to get up. And about half the people got up. And I said, now turn around and shake hands with someone else that is standing, because I said, those folks that you're shaking hands with are going through the exact same thing that you are. And it was like an eye-opener for them, because they didn't again, they were just consumed with what they were experiencing and didn't realize that there's others out there doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I have a question for both of you, actually. And this is, we know that when folks have those stressors, and we understand that they are self-medicating, there can be some self-recognition where people tell themselves, and I don't want to say guys, because women farm too, and this happens with both men and women, but that individual can say, I want to reduce my consumption, I want to reduce my addiction, I want to be better, but I don't want any counseling or therapy. Can you do one without the other?
I'm a therapist, and I would say yes. I think, and I think this is an area actually Gerry and I are pretty aligned on. Wouldn't you say, Gerry? I think we've had this conversation similar. I mean, certainly there are times, I'm not trying to diminish the role of therapists in those journeys, but we also need to be careful not to send the message that the only way for somebody to experience healing is through accessing a professional therapist. There are other ways and other methods. And you know, currently there's all sorts of resources being developed. We have a number of resources, maybe not specific to agriculture, and that's an area where we're growing. But I would say there are opportunities to join with one another. What Gerry was just talking about is that element of perfectionism that we have in agriculture. And as soon as we knock that down, as soon as we get a little bit vulnerable, that's where authentic resilience is found, meaning an ability to grow, to mature, to learn new skills. That's true resilience. And farmers are resilient. We are a resilient people. We have to be willing to take a deep breath and get a little bit vulnerable, just as Gerry said. But I would say yes. Now, there still is a role for professional therapy. There's things that we can do to help, but
there is, and part of that, and quite honestly, looking back, I didn't go through a whole lot of therapy when I dealt with my addiction issues. It was more, I fully understood why I was drinking. Mm-hmm. I fully understood what it was doing to me. And I fully understood the fact that, and I guess that's because this wasn't a one-time occurrence. There was a few occurrences where I knew full well that I could be better and do better without that crutch. And so for me, it was much more, okay, I need to connect the dots on why I'm doing this. which I did. I've always had a curiosity about my mental health and my lack of coping skills. Number one. Number two, though, is also to find better coping mechanisms. And so they're out there. And so it's a matter of, again, that curiosity and going, okay, I'm doing something here which I shouldn't be doing, so I need to quit that, and how can I best do that? And quite honestly, I mean, for me, it was when my wife and my kids came to the realization that this wasn't something that they could forcefully make me quit. This was something where they finally reached out their hand. And in my book, I say they invited me out of the closet. And I've been involved with other folks where I try to forcefully drag them out of the closet because you feel like just, knocking them up the side of the head, going, you can do better, you are better. But it doesn't work that way. You need to be invited out. And once I got that invitation, suddenly it was, okay, now I can deal with these things that were driving me to drink.
It's interesting. In your book, in chapter 15, you talk about don't suffer in silence, building a bridge. And you talk about your experience with a therapist. But close to the end here on page 151, you say, clearly there was a connection between my mental illness and my addiction issues. With my experience finding someone to talk to, I was at wit's ends. My wife suggested a naturopath. I was somewhat less than enthused at that appointment, but I owed it to my wife and my children to find a way to be healthier. And I've got to be honest with you. I think there's a number of farmers that fall into that category where we're like, I know I can change this and I feel a sense of responsibility to change it. But there's this bit of a chasm between, making that step. Do you find that still, Gerry, or is that changing?
Yes, I do. And part of the reason I think that I was as fortunate as I was is the fact of what I said before, is in 2007, when I started volunteering for the Manitoba Farm and Rural Stress Line, is when I started learning so much about mental health and the lack thereof, and really started understanding what I was experiencing. So you go down that road, and that curiosity, in fact, got me to do better. And so maybe it's a matter of getting people to be more curious about their situation and about, even whether it's reaching out for help or isn't. And you talked about resilience before, Lauren, and I saw a new one on resilience the other day. Someone said true resilience is if you lift your head up and actually ask for help. And I found that really interesting in a different perspective of resilience. But if we get to the point where we're going, yeah, you know what, I need to change, and I'm prepared to ask for help. Just again, and I say that in my book at one point too, is where I was really struggling, and someone challenged me to reach out and get help for it. And I go, yeah, okay, I guess I will. And just picking up the phone and making an appointment already. In fact, I said to the person right after I had done that, I said, I don't think I need help anymore because I feel so much better because I took that one step just to ask for help, right?
It's true. It's just getting a little bit from the inside on the outside makes a world of difference. Yeah. Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, what was that first step? Well, by gosh, we've answered that. So that's extremely helpful. Could that first step be different for each individual person? I mean, let's face it. We all say our farm situations are individualized. Our lives are very different. Does that mean the first step can be different for everyone?
I would say without question, Bridgette. And again, I'm not that much of an expert on this, but I also know other folks that have dealt with addiction issues, and we all need to take a different approach to it. And again, in my book, and I still sometimes question this, is I think there's emotional / mental addictions, and there's physical addictions. My naturopath told me that absolutely you're right, but after trying to use this to deal with your anxiety, for example, it did become a physical addiction. Well, yeah, okay, but whatever the case, I think each person has to deal with it differently, and they have to be open to dealing with it differently. And a lot of it, I think, probably boils down to the support system they might have.
There's a piece that we haven't even touched on too. It's that generational piece. I think so often as farmers, we have such a loyalty to our parents and grandparents when we have a hard time stepping away and realizing how part of our generational life story impacts who we are now, and giving ourselves permission to explore that. And actually Gerry talks about that in his book as well. We probably don't have time to go into those details, but we're a complex people. We also have complex grief. We have grief that I walked out to the barn this morning to a ewe that I thought I had saved her life, and I didn't. She died. And, and so as a farmer, like I grieve that. And so as farmers, we face all these unique issues. We have a generational piece that we often don't, recognize or spend the time with. And then we're faced with feelings of guilt and not meeting those expectations. So it's a bit of a conundrum, and yet there's healing, right? And yet there's people who can access support. There's books like Gerry's that we can read. There's podcasts like this one that we can listen to, and many more out there.
I think that generational piece is really important, Lauren, particularly for my generation. And like you say, I talk about this in the book both my age and the generation I'm part of, but also from a cultural standpoint, growing up in a home, growing up in a time, growing up in a society where if you were experiencing these challenges meant you weren't working hard enough, your faith wasn't strong enough, you weren't praying enough, and so you were always coming up short. And so you start reaching for something else that can help you again, like I did, feel better about yourself, which ultimately turns out you feel worse about yourself, but that's another old story.
It's true. It's that unhelpful guilt, right? Where from a young age, as early as 3 to 6 years of age, we feel this pressure to perform. And then because we feel like we don't meet that, we actually use anxiety as a fuel for it. Because if we worry we won't be good enough, then we'll work harder and harder and harder. But no matter what we do, we just don't quite reach it. And we get to the point, and we see this in farmers, where it's this chronic stress, and then it's usually a pretty quick flip, which is most concerning. It's one of the most concerning things that we notice in our farming communities is that quick flip. And so I'm glad, Gerry, that you are telling your story. I think you telling your story changes that for a lot of people. For a lot of farmers, that there's other things we can do.
Yeah.
Gerry, you have a new perspective and a new path based on what you once did. And I think that ties in so very well to the quote that Loren has for us today.
Yes. Okay. So the quote is by Karl Bard. I don't know if you've ever heard of Karl Bard, but he says, though no one can go back and make a brand new start, anyone can start from now and make a brand new ending. Woo! Gives you goosebumps, Amen. I think. Amen. I like that. Yeah. What do you think, Bridgette?
I look at this and think our life is full of choices. We choose our perspective. We choose what we want others to see of us. And it can change. Just because we were raised as farm kids, we farm or we don't, we can change all of those things, and we can change them for the better. We should not be afraid of a new ending for ourselves.
And can I share a quote?
Mm-hmm.
Scars show us where we've been, don't have to dictate where we're going.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I had a conversation around my kitchen table this morning with someone where we talked about how life experiences, how life events sometimes kneecapped us. But at this point, we are where we're at, and we're going forward in a new way.
Yeah. Yeah. And as daunting, as challenging as it seems, one step, right? Call one person, one step at a time to change the ending, because it's for you to write. Yeah.
So here's a little bit of a thinker for you guys, and I hope it brings a smile to your face. If you could get one thing back that was either lost or destroyed, what would that be? Was it your favorite teddy bear?
So if I had something that was lost or destroyed, what would it be?
Mm-hmm. What would you want back?
What would I want back of something that was lost or destroyed? Oh, you know what? Okay, this is a good one. I loved quilting growing up. I think I started when I was 11. I volunteered at a local museum and they taught me. Then they helped me make one for my mom as a gift. And then I had a whole bunch of fabric left over of my grandmother on my dad's side. And I made another one and I gave it away as a like wedding fundraiser thing to somebody who I really didn't know. And if I could have it back, I would definitely take that quilt back. Yeah. It was beautiful.
That would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Gerry, what about you?
I have no idea, Bridgette. What have I lost?
And it doesn't have to necessarily be a thing. It can be, maybe there was, for an example, I would think of one that my parents divorced when I was in my 20s, and it didn't go well. For the parents, for us as adult kids, none of us. And it really destroyed the relationship I had with my mom. And looking back, if I knew all the things that I know now that I could have used then, we maybe could have salvaged some of that. But it was unfortunate that it went the way it did.
Okay, well, if we can go that way, certainly, I mean, our topic today was addictions, right? I know, and I'm just so thankful that my kids love me today because they certainly had reason not to. And so I regret I lost some time with my kids and families because of some choices I made. And I would like that back. But again, I'm not looking back because that could just drive me to the abyss again. So I'm just thankful that they're with me today and that they're encouraging me and that they love me.
Yeah. There's something really precious about that piece of recognizing, kind of back to the quote, right? That you've changed the ending. Yeah. Fabulous.
I will have to say there is one sort of fun thing. Before I married my husband, he and the kids built a tree house at the house that they lived at. And it was a whole afternoon, and the neighbor kids got involved, and to the point that they put Christmas lights around the railings and plugged them in. And my husband ran in the house and baked everybody cookies so that they could break in the tree house. And after we sold the house, the next owners not only removed the tree house, but they took down the trees. If I could put that back for my kids, just that, I know they'll always have that memory, but I would love to have that tree house back for them.
That's cool.
Well, and you know what? I often talk about some of the regrets I had that I went farming. But my wife always reminds me how great it was to raise our kids on the farm.
Yes.
And she's absolutely right. And when you mentioned the treehouse, Bridgette, I remember the treehouse I built for my kids, the swing I built for my kids. Around the farm, we had valleys and creeks and the hikes we could go on. Yeah, if I could have some of that now for my grandkids, would be awesome.
Yes. So I hope people who listen think about that. What were some of the things that maybe you lost? And they don't all have to be a horrendous emotional journey for you. Some of them are just a little bit fun, and you'd love to have those moments back.
All righty. That brings us to the end of our podcast. Thank you so much, Gerry, for joining us. It has been an absolute pleasure to check in with you and hear your gems of wisdom. And before we leave, can you give us an idea of how people can reach out to you? Where can they get your book? And where can they find you?
Absolutely. They can find me at gerryfreisen.ca. That's my website. There's different links on there where they can go buy a book. As we talked about before, the easiest thing is for people to order it from Amazon, but if they want multiple copies, I can give them somewhat of a deal on that as well. But there's also more information about me. There's a few videos. In fact, Lauren, there's a video of me and you talking. But there's also a shorter video and a longer video of where I tell more about my story. And so if people are interested in that and want to learn more about me, absolutely, gerryfreisen.ca.
That sounds fantastic. Thanks for joining us, Gerry. Loren, you bring a wealth of knowledge every time. And I hope everybody goes back and listens a second time. Take all those notes. There were good things that were shared today. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.